The hall of the Galactic summit stretched for 1,000 meters, its vaulted ceilings lined with shifting panels that displayed the Empire's history. A dozen banners, each bearing the seal of a different species, hung motionless in the still air. Delegates moved like insects across the polished black floor, their voices low but brimming with self-importance. Human representatives walked in quietly, their steps cautious, their posture deliberately humble. No one noticed the woman among them. She was average in height, unremarkable in face, dressed in a simple gray uniform with no insignia. She carried no datapad, no weapon, no translator unit. She was not listed in the summit registry. When she moved, she seemed to take up no space at all, like a shadow no one bothered to track. The throne of the Galactic King stood at the far end, raised high above the crowd. 100 guards in silver armor flanked the platform, their crystalline rifles reflecting the light. The king was enormous, reptilian, and resplendent in gilded plates of ceremonial war armor. His 3 eyes glowed with pale gold light as he surveyed the arriving delegations. His people whispered his titles: Lord of 10 Systems, Devourer of Enemies, unquestioned sovereign of the Spiral Arm. Humanity's envoy approached with a carefully measured bow. They spoke of trade, cooperation, friendship, their words translated into the clicking, hissing, and subharmonic growls of dozens of languages. The king's expression did not change. He leaned forward slightly, as though struggling to remember which planet this particular species came from. The woman stood behind the envoy, silent, hands clasped. She watched the guards' patrol routes, the placement of the cameras, the way the ventilation ducts curved along the walls. She noticed where the cables fed into the holographic display projectors. She counted doors, security nodes, and emergency evacuation chutes. She did not blink often. The king interrupted the envoy with a low rumble. You come here asking for recognition. You offer nothing. You are insects at the foot of giants. The translation echoed coldly through the chamber. The human envoy tried to continue, speaking of mutual benefit, but the king rose from his throne and stepped down onto the floor. His bulk shook the hall. The guards tensed, unsure what he intended. He loomed over the human delegation. His 3 eyes scanned them lazily until they fell on the woman in gray. He sneered. What is this? A servant? A pet? The hall laughed. Delegates whispered, amused at the spectacle. Without warning, the king lifted one clawed foot and kicked her sideways, sending her sprawling to the floor. The sound of impact rang sharp against the polished surface. The envoy froze in horror. Around them, alien dignitaries chuckled. The king returned to his throne, his gesture of contempt complete. The guards resumed their posts. The woman rose slowly, brushing off her sleeve. Her face was calm, utterly blank. She met the king's gaze without anger, without fear. Then she lowered her eyes respectfully and stepped back into place. The summit continued. Speeches droned on. Trade disputes were argued, alliances reaffirmed. The woman in gray waited without expression. At no point did she speak. When the session adjourned, the human delegation prepared to leave, embarrassed and humiliated. The insult would be discussed in back rooms and diplomatic cables, but no action would be taken. Humanity was still weak, still a minor species with no power to demand respect. The woman excused herself from the group, claiming fatigue. No one questioned her. She walked alone to the wide corridors of the station, past towering windows that showed the endless curve of stars. She moved like water through the streams of alien traffic, unnoticed, unimportant. She checked her watch. 2 hours. That was more than enough. Security drones floated past, scanning ID chips, verifying passes. She carried nothing, and no one bothered to stop her. To them, she was harmless. She memorized the patrol timings in seconds. When the drones passed, she slipped through a side door as if she belonged there. She walked down maintenance halls, where the air smelled of machine oil and ionized metal. Pipes rattled with the hum of life support systems. Alien workers passed her, too busy to notice. She watched their hands, noted the tools they carried, and filed the information away. In a shadowed alcove, she palmed a small component from an unattended cart, a pressure regulator no larger than a coin. She slipped it into her sleeve without breaking stride. The palace sector was built at the heart of the station, a fortress within a fortress. Layers of security sealed it off from outsiders. Only royal staff and trusted guards were permitted beyond the checkpoint gates. The woman walked as if she belonged, her pace steady, her expression calm. When a scanning beam swept over her, she deliberately stepped into its path, letting it pass through her unshielded body. No alarm sounded. Humans barely registered as a threat to these systems. Their physiology was still considered primitive, unsuited to sabotage. Inside the palace perimeter, she observed everything. The guards were disciplined, but predictable. The drones were efficient, but relied on centralized command signals. The ventilation ducts were narrow, designed for species with flexible limbs, but large enough for her to slip through if needed. She found the locations of emergency hatches and fire suppression lines. She read the labels on coolant pipes in languages she wasn't supposed to know. She did not hurry. Every step was measured, every glance calculated. She was not preparing to leave. She was preparing to move deeper. The royal family had gathered for a private banquet after summit. The king's sons and daughters, cousins and favorite allies, feasted in a glittering chamber filled with rare wines and exotic meats. The laughter of the court echoed down the marble halls. Guards checked and rechecked the perimeter, never imagining a threat could come from the inside. The woman walked past an open kitchen door and slipped inside without slowing. Servants rushed about carrying trays. She scanned the shelves, picked up a vial of seasoning, and poured a few drops onto her fingers, rubbing them together thoughtfully. The substance reacted with the oils on her skin, producing a faint, acidic scent. She set the vial down exactly as she found it and moved on. She memorized the door code to the banquet chamber in a single glance. The keys glowed faintly as a steward entered, and her mind recorded the sequence. She didn't need to get inside yet, not while the family was still eating. The shuttle drifted into the outer lanes of the station, moving among hundreds of automated cargo haulers. The woman in gray sat in silence on a steel bench. Around her, workers from half a dozen species dozed or stared at the deck, unaware of her presence. No one spoke to her. No one remembered her. The shuttle slid into a docking cradle on the far side of the station, well away from the palace sector, and the doors opened with a hiss. She stepped into a corridor lit by dull strips of yellow light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and heated metal. Her watch read 2 hours and 10 minutes past the insult, but her work was not finished. The cooling gas would kill most of the family. The guards would suspect an accident. The investigation would begin. But accidents would be explained, contained, forgotten. What she intended to do next could not be erased. She followed the flow of workers until she reached a junction and slipped into a narrow maintenance shaft. The shaft descended at a steep angle into the mechanical levels of the station. No cameras watched here. No one bothered to monitor the unglamorous spaces where air recyclers and fuel lines crisscrossed in endless tangles. She moved with purpose, unhesitating, as though she had walked these corridors 100 times before. The first royal cousin died before the alarms even sounded. He was in his private suite, isolated from the banquet, surrounded by servants who trusted their technology more than their instincts. The woman adjusted control valve 2 decks below, sending a surge of hypercooled plasma into the cousin's personal bath system. The temperature sensors registered the change too late. When the servant turned the tap, the vapor flash froze the cousin's scaled hide in seconds. The death was silent, mercifully brief, and invisible to the cameras. She moved on without pausing, slipping through a crawl space lined with pipes that hummed with power. Her eyes traced the conduits to a junction feeding into the palace's defensive grid. The system controlled every internal door and security barrier. She knelt and twisted a manual release lever with her bare hands, cutting power to a single sector of the palace. In an instant, the backup systems rerouted control to a remote console several decks above. Guards would think it was a minor fault, nothing worth panic. They would not know their response time had been cut in half. 2 more members of the royal household were in the observation tower, watching the glittering lanes of traffic outside the station. The woman climbed a narrow stairwell, emerging into an access room directly below the tower floor. She opened a control panel with a borrowed tool, severed 3 wires, and left. Above her, the grav plates flickered. A sudden surge crushed both royals against the ceiling, then dropped them without warning, breaking bones with brutal precision. By the time a technician arrived, the woman was already gone, walking calmly toward her next target. The corridors near the throne chamber grew crowded with guards. The deaths were no longer dismissed as accidents. Security tightened. Patrols doubled. Drones scanned every face. The woman in gray lowered her eyes, moved with the crowd, and was ignored. She stepped into a service elevator moments before a squad locked the level down. The doors closed, and she descended deeper into the heart of the station. The king's eldest son tried to flee. He ordered his personal cruiser to launch immediately, overriding the flight protocols with royal authority. The woman reached the docking ring minutes before the ship's engines engaged. She walked to a maintenance panel, typed a sequence she had memorized from the glimmer of keys reflected in a guard's visor earlier, and disengaged the magnetic clamps holding the fuel lines. As the cruiser powered up, raw fuel vented into the launch tube. A single spark from the drive ignited the vapor. The explosion tore through the bay, shredding the ship and everyone aboard. The woman walked away as debris alarms rang through the station. Inside the palace, confusion turned to fear. The royal family realized someone was hunting them. The guards searched every corridor, every chamber, but they looked for assassins in black armor, killers with rifles or blades. They did not look for a quiet human woman with empty hands. She moved through a kitchen corridor, passing terrified staff who whispered about sabotage. She did not slow down. Her watch read 1 hour 37 minutes since the first death. She had more to do. The king's second son locked himself in his private armory, surrounded by soldiers. The woman reached the power junction, feeding the armory's shields, and turned a manual override. The lights went out. In the confusion, she walked past 2 guards in pitch darkness, her movements precise, her breathing steady. Inside the armory, the air filtration system switched to emergency intake, pulling in what it thought was clean oxygen. It was not. She had introduced a microcanister taken from a medical supply cart, releasing a colorless compound that made breathing impossible in seconds. By the time the backup lights flickered on, everyone inside was already on the floor. Alarms wailed across the station. Royal channels crackled with frantic orders. The guard spoke of terrorists, conspirators, infiltrators. No one spoke of a single woman moving alone. The king remained in his throne chamber, guarded by his personal elite. He roared commands, demanding the station sealed, demanding the human delegation captured, demanding answers from anyone still alive. His voice echoed to the marble halls, deeper and more furious with every report of another family member dead. The woman approached the chamber through an access duct above the ceiling. She crawled on her belly through the narrow space, her eyes unblinking, her heartbeat steady. The metal vibrated faintly beneath her as heavy boots marched below. When she reached the ventilation grill, she looked down through the slats. The king sat on his throne, massive and armored, a living fortress. Around him stood 12 guards, weapons ready, scanning every doorway. She waited. Minutes passed. Her watch read 1 hour 54 minutes since the first death. She reached into her sleeve and withdrew a second small component, scavenged from an engineering console earlier, a detonator wired to a simple charge. She pressed it against the vent wall and slid backward, counting down in silence. When the charge blew, it was not loud. The vent wall ruptured, releasing a concentrated blast of coolant mist into the chamber below. The guards shouted, turning their weapons upward. But they could not see her. The king stood, bellowing, his armor frosting as the cold spread across his plates. The guards fired blindly into the ducts, but the woman was already moving, crawling backward through the shaft, letting the mist do its work. The king tore at his own armor, gasping as the coolant burned through scales and skin. His voice turned to a rasping growl, then to silence. The guards collapsed one by one, their weapons clattering to the floor. The throne room grew still. The shuttle cleared the station's perimeter and merged with outbound traffic. The woman in gray sat motionless as the stars shifted across the viewport. No one spoke to her. No one asked why she had boarded alone without luggage or credentials. She stared straight ahead until the shuttle reached its first transfer hub, a quiet cargo platform orbiting a barren moon. She disembarked without notice and slipped into the endless flow of dockworkers. Inside the palace, chaos replaced silence. Investigators in armored suits picked through glittering halls littered with frozen bodies. The royal guard, once untouchable, had been annihilated without warning. The king's enormous corpse sat slumped on his throne, his armor crusted with frost. The air still smelled of coolant, metal, and fear. Officers shouted orders that no one obeyed. A dozen factions accused each other of conspiracy. Servants were dragged away for questioning. Drones hovered over the dead, scanning for weapons that didn't exist. The human delegation remained under heavy watch, their quarters sealed, their communications jammed. They swore ignorance, but their protests only made the aliens more afraid. If the humans did not send this killer, then who had? If they did, what else were they capable of? The diplomats sat in silence, realizing that no explanation would sound believable. Across the station, alien news feeds lit up with reports of the royal massacre. Word spread faster than any security lockdown. Video clips leaked from surveillance cameras. The banquet chamber filling with mist, guards collapsing in seconds, explosions in the docking bay. The images shocked the galaxy, not because a ruler had been killed, but because it was done without fleets, without armies, without warning. One human woman had walked the most secure palace in 10 systems and erased a dynasty. At the transfer hub, the woman changed shuttles. She paid in unmarked credits, never giving her name. No one remembered her face. She moved through the crowds as if she had always been there, just another passenger in a gray uniform. A trader brushed against her shoulder and forgot her the moment she passed. She boarded a slow cargo freighter bound for deep space, vanishing into void while every sensor in the Empire scanned for phantom fleets and invisible armies that did not exist. In the throne world's capital, panic consumed the council chambers. Generals demanded mobilization. Ministers called for mass arrests. Nobles sent private envoys begging for protection. The Empire's fleets gathered in high orbit, bristling with weapons, scanning the dark for human warships that never appeared. They found nothing but silence. On distant planets, common citizens whispered in markets and taverns. They said the humans had sent an avenger. They said she killed kings for sport. They said Earth bred assassins away other species-bred soldiers. The stories grew with every retelling. Tales of invisible blades, of ghost ships, of killers who could walk through walls. Fear spread faster than fact. No one dared to insult humanity again. Not because of diplomacy, but because no one knew where the next gray-clad shadow might appear. The investigation dragged on. The palace security feeds showed nothing but a blur of crowds and corridors. No weapon signatures, no sabotage alerts, no trace of an intruder. Every guard sworn to protect the royal family was dead. Every defense system had functioned perfectly until it didn't. Experts from across the Empire examined the evidence and found nothing they could understand. A quiet human woman had passed unnoticed through every checkpoint, every scanner, every patrol. The human delegation was finally released, escorted off the station under heavy guard. They were warned never to return. None of them understood what had happened. None dared ask too many questions. The woman in gray was not among them. She had left long before, without orders, without permission, without witnesses. Far from the throne world, she disembarked at an unmarked station orbiting a nameless rock. She stepped into the cold air and vanished into a maze of cargo bays. No one noticed when she removed her watch and crushed it under her boot. She carried nothing, kept no trophies, sent no messages home. She simply disappeared. Weeks passed. The Empire tore itself apart searching for an enemy that didn't exist. Factions blamed each other. Loyalists purged rivals. Fleet admirals swore revenge against humanity, while privately refusing to approach Earth's borders. No one wanted to test whether the stories were true. If one unarmed human could wipe out an entire royal line in 2 hours, what could 10 humans do? What could 100 do? What could a planet of billions accomplish if provoked? On Earth, no celebration marked the event. No medal was given, no speech delivered. Most humans never knew what had happened. The woman in gray never reported her actions, and no one asked. She was not a hero. She was not an agent of the state. She was a warning. In the farthest reaches of the empire, alien rulers whisper her legend. They built taller walls, hired more guards, layered more defenses around their thrones. But they slept less soundly. They watched every shadow, every doorway, every quiet servant who moved without speaking. They imagined human eyes behind every faceless mask. The Galactic Summit reconvened under new leadership. The throne sat empty, draped in mourning silk. Delegates spoke of peace, of order, of preventing further chaos. None dared speak of humans except in careful, respectful tones. The smallest species in the room commanded more fear than entire fleets. Somewhere beyond the edge of map space, a lone traveler in gray walked off a transport and into the night of an unnamed world. She left no trace, no rumor, no record of her passing. The stars wheeled overhead, uncaring, as she vanished into the crowd. Her message remained behind, written not in words but in silence, carved into the memory of every alien who had heard the story. Humans are not weak. Humans remember. Humans endure insults, but they do not forget them. No one ever found her. No one ever proved she existed. But the galaxy changed. Thrones trembled when footsteps echoed in empty halls. Guards checked every face twice. And whenever an alien ruler considered raising a hand against humanity, they thought of the king who kicked a human woman, and of how his entire family died 2 hours later.